Hello there and welcome to Community Life. Here we talk with the community experts about their journeys and learn from each other. And today we have a conversation with Scott Wilder, a native New Yorker who moved to California in the early 90s to work on an electronic channel. Internet nowadays? Historically a big company person. He worked in Apple, Google, Microsoft, Atlassian, Coursera, Hubspot, you name it, and who likes cars and continuously learns during his life. So, hello, Scott.
Thank you for having me today. And yeah, back in the 90s, or I like to tell people in the 1900s, I was asked to work on something that was just starting up called the electronic channel. And when I arrived in California, they basically said it was the internet. And the company was Silicon Graphics. You can Google it and see it has quite a history. And at that time, they asked me to take email and figure out how to use email as a support channel. And then they showed me this thing they called a browser, and the rest was history.
Yes. And once you're told that you have New York inside you and San Francisco outside, tell me more about that.
Yeah, I grew up in New York City, right in the city. And so inside, growing up, basically, so I grew up in New York City, and basically growing up in New York City, sometimes you had to fend for yourself. I'll put it that way. You ran into some real challenges, but it made me aggressive, elbowy, really ambitious, goal-driven, all that stuff. But then when I moved to California, most of that stuff stayed inside me. And on the outside, it became very mellow, very relaxed. And so my presence, I know, is kind of he's kind of a laid back kind of guy, but there's still a lot of New York DNA inside of me.
How do you keep all this inside?
I exercise an hour a day. I go for long dog walks with Grizzly, an hour a day. But I think that's a really good point is, it's important to whatever it's with stress, or whether it's, something you're feeling from work, or whether it's, this kind of aggressive type of thing, is to figure out like, what is your outlet? And for me, being in California, I describe San Francisco as like summer camp for adults. So there's always plenty to do here in the outdoors. And like I said, I work out a lot as well.
How did you meet your Labradoodle Grizzly?
Well, it's a very funny story. So my daughter, I have two kids, Scotty, who's 13, and Catherine Rose, who I call K Rose, who's 12. She said she wanted a dog. And I said, sure, no problem. But what I didn't know is that she wanted to go to a breeder. And so we went to this breeder. And what was interesting for me was that the breeder was interviewing us to see if we were appropriate for the dog. And so the breeder said we passed, which was interesting. And then the breeder basically said, we want to give you this dog, and sent us a picture. And my wife shared the picture with me. And I said, what's the name of the dog? And she said, Grizzly. Now you can change the name, but I thought having a dog named Grizzly Wilder was just classic. And so how do we get the dog? I passed the test.
What questions did the breeder ask you?
The breeder didn't really ask too many questions. She more or less wanted to see how and this is what I'm thinking she wanted to see how we interacted with all the different dogs. So, it was like paradise. We walked into this yard, and in the yard, actually it was her driveway with a fence. In her driveway with a fence were 7 or 8 different puppies. They're all Labradoodles. And I think she wanted just to see how we interacted with each other as a family, and also how we interacted with the Labradoodles, and which ones, especially my kids, gravitated towards.
And to understand how your kids will also deal with dogs. Because I know that I have 2 dogs, and first is Chihuahua, second is Pomeranian. And when we were buying Pomeranian, it was very similar. So we went with my wife and kid, and this person was looking at us like, are you okay for that? So yeah, I totally feel on this story. And did Grizzly meet real grizzlies?
He hasn't yet. Well, actually, he's seen a lot of pictures of grizzlies, because we do have pictures of bears in the house. But no, he's met a lot of other dogs. He actually has a gang of Labradoodles that he gets together with and walks on at the beach here. I was going to say Stinson Beach. No, it's Chrissy Field Beach. But so he hasn't met other grizzlies in person, but a lot of other different types of dogs. He's got two gangs he hangs out with.
Why do you have pictures of bears?
My son is fascinated with Yellowstone National Park, and he's also just fascinated with wildlife and national parks and things like that. So we also have stickers of fish on the wall because my daughter was really into aquariums. So I think with my kids as they grow older is, the house is such an important environment for them. So I really want to just, obviously you get books and you get clothing, but also, what can we do to the actual physical space to make it seem magical to them?
What kind of father are you?
Oh, that's a great question. Probably my kids could do a better job in answering. I think I can tell you what I aspire to be like. I really try and be as open and direct with my kids as possible. Whether it's about those things in life that teenagers need to learn about, and really offer them a sounding board. Sometimes my kids say I'm too open and they don't need to know that stuff, but I really believe that I'd rather them hear it from me, from the horse's mouth, than hear it, in a schoolyard or from friends. I think the second thing is, I was really influenced, and it's a work thing, by learn, teach, learn. So at Intuit, we had this motto called learn, teach, learn, that the best way to learn something is after you learn it is to teach others. And so, I really do a lot of that. And it's funny because for my son, sometimes I'll do it about finance. Sometimes I'll do it about baseball. Sometimes I'll do it about wow, I really learned something from a coworker today. And I think the other thing is, it's kind of embarrassing to admit, but one of my New Year's resolutions was to spend 30 quality minutes with each of my kids every day. And I think, sometimes we get so busy, obviously kids need you a lot when they're really little, but as they become teenagers, they think they might need you less. So I really, know it's an important time in their life, and it's an important time in my life. So I really try and say, okay, have I spent 30 minutes with each one? And on the one hand, 30 minutes doesn't sound like a lot, and I spend other times with them. But I think it's really important. And, I really try and spend those quality moments with them. And I think the last thing is I try and reflect on that as well at the end of the day, because, you can look at your iPhone and look at all those photos you have with kids, but it's really important as a father just to kind of reflect on, what you did well, what you could have done better. And it's important to them, but it's also really important to you, as you get older.
Are you being hard on yourself?
No, I don't think so. I think it's, I'm very aware of time, and, I really try and maximize time as much as possible. And I think also, it's not hard on myself. I think it's clarity about what's important to me. And those 30 minutes were one of my top 5 goals for the year. And so.
What do you mean by saying quality minutes?
Yeah, so I have this thing where I look at the day as 3 8-hour blocks. And 1 8 hours is sleep. And, of course, that's negotiable with yourself. And 1 8 hours is work, and that's negotiable as well. And then you have these other 8 hours. And I really try and think about what can I do for myself and my family and my friends in terms of those 8 hours, right? So working out every day, that's an hour. And it's not like I sit down every night and, recalibrate all this and figure, look at the balance sheet and whatever, but it's just kind of a framework for me that I think about once in a while. And so then I have 7 hours a day of, what do I want to do? Do I want to go off and read about something I'm really interested in? Do I want to spend that time with my kids? Do I want to take Grizzly for a walk? So it's just being conscious of time and trying to make it quality time as well.
Still, how do you understand that it's quality time, not just time, because you can just read some book, you can go do some time, But what is the difference between time and quality time?
Yeah. I have this thing about where if it puts a smile on my face, I feel like so, it's not like is it quality in terms of good quality or bad quality. It's like how I feel,
Hmm. Yeah.
and here's a classic thing is so I pick up my daughter. She's out of school now because it's the summer, but when I pick her, but during the school year, I pick her up twice a week when she's with her friends at one of their at where they go, whether it's the library or some other place, and we walk home together. And she puts her arm through my arm, right? And that is a quality moment.
Yeah.
That is a
Yeah.
moment that, that just puts a smile on my face. And I do have some, I do feel good walking down the street when other people say, wow, look at that father and daughter. But that to me, that one moment, right? It's probably like 5 minutes because we live pretty close to where the kids meet.
Yeah.
But that 5 minutes is worth thousands of days.
Yeah. Yeah. Now I feel it. Thank you very much for sharing that. And let's start from the beginning. Tell me a little about your parents. Who are they?
Yeah, so I grew up in New York City, as I said, and my parents got divorced when I was 1 year old. So my father, um, I didn't really know him that well. He wasn't around very much in my life. My stepfather, who became my stepfather when I was three, raised me, and he worked in the financial industry. He was a stockbroker, and he was pretty demanding in terms of getting your work done, being a
Mm.
good athlete, um, wearing a necktie sometimes at the dinner table. And so, I think I kind of rebelled from a lot of that, as some entrepreneurs do. I've read about that in terms of so I wanted to be, different. I wanted to be open to possibilities in life, and as opposed to having a very structured approach. And my mom, she was kind of, I don't think I appreciated her as much as I should, and I didn't appreciate her that much until I got older and until she passed away. So she was very giving in terms of her family and her friends, and what I inherited from her was being a connector and a networker, and maybe also being a little bit extroverted. So she was really into following up with friends and bringing people together. So at Thanksgiving at our house, we would have like 40 people, just these huge get-togethers in different moments. And, when there was a birthday, it was like really huge in terms of getting people together. And it's interesting. I married somebody whose family is the same way in terms of I live next door to my mother-in-law, and her house, there's just tons of people coming and going. But the other thing about my mother too is she was a real planner.
Mm.
Like she really, I talked about the 8 hour, those 3 8 hour segments. I probably got that from her because in the old days, you didn't have Google Calendars. You had a file of facts or a book where you wrote down your meetings, and she wrote down everything, what she was going to do throughout the day. I mean, when she passed away, we would find these books from, she died in her 80s, but we'd find like 40 years or 50 years of every year of just this is what she did at 8:30. This is what she did at 9. So I would describe her as a giver and a planner. And I describe my stepfather as somebody who is very structured and, focused on, how you present yourself in life.
Wearing a necktie at the dinner table. How did you feel about that?
Um, so we went out every Sunday night. We had to wear neckties. We sometimes, when we had guests over, we had to wear neckties. And then how you dressed at the dinner table was really important. I didn't really like it. I felt kind of constrained by a necktie. But I did learn how to tie a necktie at a very young age.
Yeah. Yeah.
For those folks who don't wear neckties, maybe I'll do a YouTube video on how to tie neckties. But I think that was part of I went to California because I really kind of wanted to try things different. I also, just being transparent here, I felt very controlled in that necktie environment. So going to California enabled me to kind of break the umbilical cord, so to speak, and to have some freedom. And that's all the stereotypes of California were true here about, people could be, these days, there's a lot of emphasis on, who you are, whether it's your gender, whether it's, your race or whatever. I found California when I moved here in the 90s a lot more open in that way compared to the environment I grew up in New York.
And do you have many guests in your house right now?
Well, right now I'm by myself, but
I mean, like
yeah.
in general.
No, we have. So when I think about my house, I live in a building with 2 condos, and I share a wall with my in-laws. And so my mother-in-law tends to have lots of different people there. We do have a lot of people coming and going here, but I think it's more there, and it's really interesting. So it's a very international family. So my mother-in-law was from Puerto Rico. My father-in-law is from New England, but my wife grew up in Uruguay, Puerto Rico, New Zealand, and France. And so we're a very close family. So my sister-in-law, my wife's sister, she married a guy from Colombia. My brother-in-law, my wife's brother, married somebody from Brazil. And we have, a few Guatemalans who also hang out in the house. So it's a lot of Latin, Spanish influence, but it is this kind of international flavor. Just the side story here about me is, so when I was in college, I played soccer, and I was one of the few Americans on the team. So when I graduated from college, I realized I didn't know a lot about the world. And so I basically went to go visit them. And little did I know that I would spend about 7 or 8 years outside the United States. So there is this so not only are there a lot of guests next door, but there's this strong international flavor to it.
What did you learn during those 7, 8 years?
Oh, man, I learned so much. I mean, it was so one of the things was all of a sudden, not everybody spoke English. And what I mean by that is I had to really learn other languages. I had to learn how to be, all of a sudden I couldn't easily dominate a conversation. So I had learned how to listen, I think is a really important thing. I learned, obviously I wasn't poor or anything, and not obviously, but I wasn't poor or anything like that. But I learned about just taking care of myself. I couldn't rely on a phone call to home or anything like that. I really had to figure out what I was going to do for a job. I had to, make new friends. And some of the times most of the times were great and quality moments. And some of the times were challenging. When I think about the challenging moments, I lived in a room in Hong Kong where if I put my arms out, I could touch both walls. And it was like a community bathroom, and there's no kitchen. And I think it was even like Thanksgiving or something, and I couldn't find a place to have dinner with others, right? So I think I went to McDonald's in Hong Kong, and I decided I didn't want to eat in McDonald's. So I actually, because my Cantonese was non-existent and my Mandarin was so. So I actually took my dinner and I had it in a movie theater. Right. So, that's probably not the most cheerful moment of having Thanksgiving dinner in a movie theater, eating McDonald's. But on the other hand, it was just it's just kind of what you did, and I had some incredibly high moments. I used to spend every Christmas in Sweden, and I'd figure out how to get to Sweden. And the Swedes were just incredibly open in bringing me into their family and sharing glögg and all sorts of stuff. So I think, I learned about, the art of listening and not being the dominant one. I learned about, just making the most of a moment. And, it's funny growing up in New York City, which is obviously, very cosmopolitan, but I just learned there's just a whole other world out there, many worlds, and they're all different.
And what changed in your life when you learned to listen?
Um, what changed? I think that I didn't have all the answers. I mean, that's, because I mean, growing up, I was like, you have to learn this and you'll have all the answers. I think it just, I didn't have all the answers, but it also brought me closer to people. I think that was, and I'm still learning how to listen. I think that you never are like the perfect listener. And I think having kids helps a lot with that. Um, I think reminding yourself that, each person has like this incredible story. And it's
Mm.
funny, I just left this team exercise. We did these journey lines, and what that was is when we all kind of plotted out, like, so the way the journey line works is on one axis is you plot your age, and on the other axis are the high and low points in your life, or as we say in
Mm.
California, the high energy and the low energy. And so we, as a team, I introduced it to the team, and then we all went through it and plotted out our lives. And in listening to them, we realized that we're all very different, but there's so many similarities. Like we all have stories and each story is unique, but there's also similarities about experiences, the loss of a parent, right? Every loss is different. But on the other hand, we felt that grief, or, you know, um, delivering this incredible, or having a child, like, it's an incredible moment. Each one is different, but sharing, just sharing that. And so I think listening, just kind of reminds me about, like, everybody's got a unique story, but there are definitely these common themes in life.
I saw one of these graphs you shared on LinkedIn, and on your low energy side, it was floated out to sea. Tell me
Yeah.
more about that.
Yeah. So you can see my journey line on LinkedIn. And so when I was about 8 years old, 9 years old, I was playing at Nauset Beach, Nauset Beach, Cape Cod. Nauset Beach is my favorite place in the world. So, and we had these two families that we always went to Nauset Beach with, actually one family. And what was really interesting about the family is the grandparents grew up together, the parents grew up together, and I grew up with the kids. And now actually the kids are growing up. And we were playing around in the rubber raft, and I was like lying in the raft, and my friend Johnny, who Johnson, he would pull me around in the raft in the surf. And I got really relaxed in that surf and I fell asleep. Johnny let go of the rope, and the riptide pulled me out to sea. And it was probably about 3/4 or a mile to a mile, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it is a lot when you're thinking about the ocean. And it was the Atlantic Ocean. And as my parents like to tell the story, all of a sudden they didn't see me.
All of a
And
sudden.
all of a sudden, like, so, that raises the question of keeping an eye on the kid, which I highly recommend. Twice I've had to jump in the pool to save my kids. But so, and so they didn't see me. And so basically Johnny's dad, it was too far to swim out. So he got on a surfboard and he paddled out pretty far, like I said, not a quarter, a mile, almost a mile. And he saw me and I was still asleep. And he pulled me back to shore. Now, a few things, you're 8 years old or 9 years old. So you're not strong enough to swim in the Atlantic Ocean. And two is, whether it was a 3/4 of a mile, that's a long way for anybody. And then, I just got lucky that, he saw me, and, and thinking about that in life. So it was a low point because I almost lost my life.
Yeah.
But, we all go through these stages. I think not all of us, but, in my life, there's been several moments when I've gone through these like life-threatening moments. And that one just really, it's something I think about a lot. And yeah, so that was the story of falling asleep on a rubber raft in the Nauset Beach.
Did he wake you up when he found you?
Yeah, he woke me up. Yeah, he woke me up, and it was one of those oh shit moments. It's like, oh my God, like, I looked at the shore and these, I don't know if we're doing video here, but I'm holding up this little, thing with it was like the size of a pinky. All of a sudden, seeing your parents on shore. I mean, you couldn't even make out it was the parents, but you did see all these people standing on shore. So, anyway, and it was also in the private beach section. So
Mm,
Nauset Beach and some of these beaches, there's the lifeguard section, which is the public section. But we used to take beach buggies to this private area. So it wasn't like the lifeguard was going to see me. Um, but I was very grateful when, Mr. Nordlinger passed away. And we grew up together, and I could never call him Victor, Mr. Nordlinger. That was one of the things that I said to him about, my life, and just how grateful I was that he saw me or saved me when I was a little speck out there in the Atlantic Ocean.
yeah, it's an amazing story. And, you know, I feel like if I were you, Nauset Beach won't be my favorite place, but
Uh,
it's still your favorite place. So tell me, how did it become your favorite place in the world?
yeah, it's funny in a lot of these like team building exercises when people try and break the ice, they say, "So tell me about your favorite place," and people will say, Japan, Hokkaido, Sweden, Denmark, uh, China. And I say Nauset Beach. And I think it's as simple as, those quality, you think about quality time, that's where I grew up. I mean, I grew up in New York City, but I used to spend my summers at Nauset Beach, and I just have great memories of it. And so I think it's just a classic where I spent my childhood, and just having great moments there and learning how to swim there. And I was there with my friends, and I learned about getting too sunburned. I learned about, yeah, one day I got really sunburned there. But, and also I think it was a big part of where I first had my independence. So as a, 10, 11-year-old, I was able to bike to Nauset Beach on my own. I did learn about, swimming where the lifeguards were. So it was fond memories. You can go to all these great places in the world, and they're great experiences. And I talked about how I lived overseas and all these amazing places. But there's the classic of wanting to go home and the value of home.
Tell me one fun story of you and Nauset Beach.
Well, the raft is one. Floating out to sea on the raft, but maybe that's not a fun one. Um,
It's very mixed, it's kind of like scary fun type.
yeah. One fun story. I just had like some great memories of, I would go there at night, and we would build these fire, and we weren't supposed to, but build these fires on Nauset Beach, and roast marshmallows. And, as we got older, some of my friends, would get stoned, and party and things like that. And then, it would get cold at night. And so it was a great place to stay warm. So the fireplaces, I wrote this thing many years. I don't know if you picked this up and when you looked into my background, but I'm not the best writer, but I love writing. And I've done a lot of creative writing. And I wrote once about the fireplaces and the power of the fireplaces at Nauset Beach, and how, throughout my years there and to this day, just building these little kind of makeshift fireplaces with driftwood, and just the memories of getting together with the Nordlinger family when I was, 0 to 12 years old. And then when I was 12 years old, taking my dates, to the beach. And then as I got older, taking my families. But this theme of the fireplace, like we always built these fireplaces there.
What happens when you sit around a fireplace?
Well, when you're younger and you have kids, you have lots of fun fights in the sand. So there's nothing like getting sandy. I mean, I just love that experience of getting sandy. And then you jump in the ocean to get the sand off you, and then you have salt on you. So I think it's the fun fights. I think it's the sharing of stories. I think it's when I was younger, I would take my dates there. So, making out with them there. Yeah. But it's funny, this theme about like, getting sandy, sharing stories, and then jumping in the ocean, and then you're all salty, and then you have to go home and take the salt off your body. So yeah, I forget the original question, but the moments are just sharing stories and getting as sandy as possible.
And then salty as possible.
Salted, yeah.
Have you ever met sharks there?
Oh, funny story. Yeah. So, so there's been sharks there, especially in the later years, because there was this where my family lived. It was there's a bay, And then you could, and for those folks who know Cape Cod, there's a thing called Pleasant Bay. What a great name. And you could actually, drive from home to the ocean side, or you could take a little motorboat across the bay. And so I used to take a motorboat across the bay to Nauset Beach. But many years ago, when there was a really bad storm or storms, there was an underpass. And so all of a sudden, the water from the ocean flowed into the bay, and the water temperature changed. But anyway, there became more sharks at the ocean. Now there's lots of shark warnings. And 2 years ago, I was with my sister. My family went to Puerto Rico, and I wanted to be with my sister because she just bought a house there. And so we're sitting on the beach, and all of a sudden a lifeguard whistles. I did go to the beach part with the lifeguard. Everybody out of the water because there's sharks. And so everybody gets out of the water, and like 20 minutes later, I decide to go in the water. And my sister's like, she didn't see me go in the water. And after I got out, she goes, "Why are you in?" No, she's like waving me in, like, "Get out." And I said to her, "Well, there's lots of people farther out than me. So if the sharks are going to get us, they'll get those people first, and then me."
Yeah, exactly.
There's probably not like a good, thought about humanity, or caring for you. But yeah, so there's sharks there. You can see them in the water. I know why there are more sharks there, because when this cut through happened, there's more seals. So there's a lot more sharks in the Northeast. And you can see them sometimes. I do look at Google Satellite, so you can see aerial shots. And I do jump in the water sometimes when they're supposedly nearby.
Why? Why do you do that?
No, because there's other people in there.
Okay. So like,
no, it's maybe there's and maybe this is the New Yorker in me. I think there's a part of me that likes to push the envelope a little bit and try things out. So
you kind of already answered a little by telling your story to the next question, but still, how risky are you?
I think I was a lot more risky as a kid. And now that I'm a parent, I probably have to set a good example. So, growing up in New York City, I used to go into Central Park at night, which for those people in the States or people in New York, you're not supposed to go in Central Park at night. And I used to play ultimate Frisbee with two friends. No, ultimate Frisbee is a team sport, but we used to play Frisbee at night from like 1 to 5 in the morning in Central Park. So I would really, I was crazy in thinking about that. I think that there's things I did overseas. There's a whole story about I was in the Soviet Union when they shot the Korean airliner down. And so I went out of my way to ask Soviet so-called officials, like, what's the story here? So I have lots of stories. So I think when I was younger, I kind of pushed the envelope, but then I wouldn't even say once I had kids. When I hit 40, I actually stopped a lot of things in my life. I stopped snowboarding. That's not risky, but I realized I had bad knees, so I don't want to mess up my knees for life. But when I hit 40, I just kind of recalibrated things, and I think since then, I've taken less risk in certain areas.
And did Soviet Union officials answer you?
Yeah, so it was a really interesting moment. So, and this is how I live my life. A friend of mine said, "Hey, let's go to the Soviet Union." And back then, you had to go on these very organized trips with something called Intourist. And so this was 1983. So I was pretty young then. And so I said, "Sure, let's go." So I flew to England, and we got our, visas and passports done, or whatever you had to get there. And so we went on this group tour because that's the only way you could go then. And so I went to Moscow, Leningrad, Azerbaijan, Tbilisi, so Azerbaijan, Tbilisi, so Armenia, Georgia, and Azerbaijan. And when we were in the south, I think we're in Azerbaijan, in Yerevan, that's when they shot the Korean airliner down. And right away, the trip had to go to Moscow. So I went to Moscow, and I did ask a lot of questions. And everybody told me, anybody that was a so-called official, The way I found out about it was listening to BBC, but every so-called official told me that it didn't happen. Never happened. Like you're a young kid, you're just like got a great imagination. So finally I went to the American embassy and we watched CNN and they, then I knew it happened. But everybody kind of denied it, which was really interesting for me. And then I ended up writing an article on it that was in the International Herald Tribune about what it was like to be on an adventure in the Soviet Union to find out like whether or not this plane actually got shot down. And if, for those folks who aren't old enough to remember, that was a pretty big deal then. Things were pretty tense between the US and Russia. But I guess that's a classic example of like me, maybe pushing the envelope and just kept asking people over and over, come on, it's happened. And then I tried to convince them, so, I was really young and I was like, no, it really did happen. It did happen. So, but it was a great time in the sense that, I just learned a lot in that experience. So.
Scott, I have so many questions to you, and I really wish to have the sky's the limit to our conversation, but time is the limit. So let's jump to the rapid fire questions. So the first one, marketing or community?
Both.
I choose both, exactly.
Yeah.
Hockey or soccer?
Hockey. I grew up such a hockey fanatic. So another story is I was really upset I was born in America. I wanted to be a hockey player, and I turned my whole room into like a Canadian museum. So those folks who know me, and true story, I wish we had video here because I had Canadian flags all over my room. And I have pictures of like growing up of just, so hockey and Canada.
You're Canadian in disguise.
Yeah.
What are your favorite color and song?
Color? Color is indigo blue. And favorite song is anything by Eric Clapton. I really love Eric Clapton as a musician and kind of grew up listening to Eric Clapton. Layla is a great song, but there's so many others. And, for those folks who don't know Clapton, check it out. It's amazing.
If you were a superhero, what superpower would you have?
Oh, mind reader.
Who do you learn from in the community world? Name just one person.
Oh, that's a great. So he's no longer alive. Cliff Figelo, who The Well is one of the first, if not the first, community on the internet, and he was one of the founders of The Well, and he taught me everything I know, or a lot of what I know, and a lot of what people should definitely Google him. He was just an amazing soul, amazing teacher, no ego, and a lot of what we talk about today, he and the guys that worked in The Well, Howard Rheingold is probably a name that some people might know, they were the ones that started all this.
What is the one thing you still use and that you learned from him back then?
Yeah, I think the one big thing is understanding like technology and how it relates to people and how people communicate with each other. Like we have all this great technology out there, but when you're trying to build a community, it's really important to understand how comfortable they are with technology. Like Discord is great, but some people might not be comfortable with voice, right? We all want to build these incredible communities and throw lots of bells and whistles on it. But sometimes, just starting with a traditional discussion thread might be the most important thing. Or maybe you have a community that's not comfortable. Like maybe it's a community that's not comfortable, exchanging a discussion online. And so maybe you have to start offline first, right? It's just understanding your audience, listening to your audience we talked about before, and also their environment in terms of what they're comfortable with.
Name two people who I should definitely invite to have a community live conversation.
Bill Johnson. So Bill is an amazing community person. I think he started Autodesk's community. It started Dell's community. And I also look at things in terms of generations. So I talked about Cliff as being like one of the first generation. I think Bill and I are probably like the third or fourth generation in internet people. And then in terms of another person, that's a good one. I would say Nick Tolstashev. So Nick worked with me at Intuit. He's a great community leader. He's managed a number of web communities, Granular, WebRoot. But what was amazing about Nick is he was working on the front lines at Intuit doing support. And, I recruited him to be a community leader, and he just totally embraced it. He learned everything he could by talking to people who were in the community space, and he still does that today. And yeah, he became he went from a frontline leader. I don't even know if he was answering calls or then or not, but I don't remember. But he has so much wisdom in terms of building communities.
Is there one question that I definitely should have asked you but didn't?
Yeah. So what do I see? What do we see as the big challenges for communities moving forward?
So what is the big challenge? What is the biggest challenge?
Maybe I'm going to interview you. You tell me first, and then I'll tell you.
Okay. So from my perspective, the biggest challenge is we are getting divided by the social media, news, ChatGPT, online. So all those tools, from my perspective, all those tools are kind of helping us, but they are not helping us to communicate more. They are getting us far and far and far from each other. So it's like super on the spot. And yeah, what is from your perspective?
No, I mean, that really resonates with me. I think, something about the future. I think, obviously AI is a big topic and everybody's into that, but sitting down with somebody is really important. And, I think something that community people forget is it's high touch in the beginning, right? So as you're building a community, meeting with people, if you can in person or on Zoom, and then really understanding what's important to them. I talked about technology and all that. And, but then those human interactions, those synchronous human interactions, not asynchronous, are extremely important. Yeah. And so I think as we look into the future is how you can maintain those, right? I mean, I really am grateful that you reached out. And I really think, your approach of trying to learn about somebody first and doing it, I know this will be a podcast, but doing it real time is really powerful. And I think that's something as we look into the future is to really hold on to that. And maybe it's analogous. I always bring things back to my kids is, having them sit at the dinner table without any devices, just even for 30 minutes or even for 10 minutes and just talking, because we might be floating out in that raft someday with somebody. And we probably won't get cell phone reception.
Totally. Scott, I keep watching on the clock. I know you have another meeting, and thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for being so open. It's so nice to learn how risky are you, and some of those moments, how you almost kind of lost your life. It was really hard. And your approach on raising your kids and just to get to know you as a person. So I know that it's totally hard to, fit yourself in like 45 minutes or else. And we will definitely have like volume 2. I have a lot of questions still. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for this conversation, and see you in the community world.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. Anytime you want to do a sequel or follow up. And then I just want to thank you for really sharing all these people's lives with me. I mean, that's extremely what a gift. So thank you.
And thank you so much for listening. If you like the show, hit the like button or 5 stars and share it with your friend. That's it. We're done. See you in the next episode.